Yeah.
We are on mute again.
No, we're not.
Yes, we were. Hi, guys. Trying again. Today, we are so happy to have Melissa join us. She's a certified advanced sommelier who spent the last 12 years working in wine. Over those years, she learned all about the stuff that can go into wine and all the ways it can be processed and manipulated so it hardly resembles wine, or at least the kind of wine she wants to drink. So in 2015, she started Brock Juice to bring organic, low-intervention wines to drinkers everywhere. Now she spends her days chasing down, drinking honest and delicious wines from inspiring small producers around the world for Rock Juice, while trying to keep the trains running for her family at home. All right, Melissa, we're going to invite you to join us.
Bringing you in as a panelist.
There we are. Hopefully it's letting her join the video.
And we're going to have you start your video and
from our backyard to yours.
Time to wind down.
Looks like
are you ready?
So I'm jealous.
Are you ready for the wind down, Melissa?
I'm ready. Look, big glass, full bottle. We're good.
We're going to talk. All right. So before we get started, let's just, I've got my bottle of Front Porch, which was in the picture that you were promoting the show on. And I was so excited. And by the way, the last time we were at Front Porch was with you, like a week before Harper was born.
That's right.
Kind of crazy, right? So I'm going to pour us a delicious Front Porch. And we're going to be having Sebastian come on in a couple weeks, so we can learn lots about this. But why don't you tell us what's in your glass?
I am drinking a lovely rosé from Lazio, biodynamic producer that I visited last summer, Palazzo Tronconi. Hi, Marco. We'll have to send it to Marco. Certified biodynamic. We can talk later. On the label, something you can look for. Hi, sweetie. My kids are saying hi. Awesome. Delicious. It tastes like watermelon fizz.
Okay. Hey, Miss, can you just prop your camera up a little bit? We're getting your eyes cut off.
Okay. Sorry. How about if I scoop back?
I mean, we're getting a great scoop back. Perfect. We're getting a great shot of the wine. So.
And your fireplace.
And your fireplace. That's right. How are you doing in
Yeah.
quarantine right now? I guess you're sheltering in place.
We're sheltering in place.
Cheers.
We're going crazy. We're drinking a lot of wine. A lot of these virtual sessions, not quite as satisfying, but the wine's getting us through.
All right.
I wish I was there with you.
Me too. Soon enough, my dear. Soon enough. All right. So let's dig in. Tell us a little bit about how you found your way to running Rock Juice. And our audience, as you know, Melissa, are entrepreneurs and small businesses. And this show is really about matching something that we love, which is wine, and the entrepreneurial journey. So tell us how you ended up running Rock Juice.
Love it. Okay. So I've been in wine since 2005 when I opened my Italian wine bar called Ottimista. A few years later, opened a retail wine shop. Ran those both for 12 years, sold them in between babies 1 and 2. And it wasn't until at that point that I started learning about natural wine. As you know, as a new mom, you start digging into ingredients and everything you put in your body. And I realized I had no idea all of those years buying wine for my restaurant, for my shop, what really went into wine and how it could be seriously fucked with. And I got really pissed off that as an industry insider who visited producers, had people coming in, tasting wines with me all the time, talking about the wines, we never talked about what actually went into that process and all of the additives that could be in there and how prevalent chemical farming was in viticulture. And I realized that if I didn't have access to that information, there's no way consumers would have any idea what they were drinking.
Yeah.
People who care about what they eat and they source their ingredients very carefully, yet they're drinking something that could be full of chemicals and additives and really like junk food when they would only eat, organic, clean food at home. So it was a lack of transparency that really motivated me to find a way to make it accessible to everyone.
So, I think one of the things that's a big challenge for is, you've said it, which is how do you know? I think people, and we sort of talk about the folks on this show, is this is a chance to kind of demystify something that seems really complicated and hard to kind of understand. And I think being able to find a wine that you like and that's in your budget and all those kind of things is already hard enough. So how would you go about figuring out that a wine is natural or biodynamic or organically farmed or good for you?
Well, this is the tricky question because, as you know, wine has no ingredient label. It's the only thing that we ingest that is not required to disclose ingredients. So even wines that are very natural still don't have it on there. So you have to.
It only says don't drink while you're pregnant.
Right. That's really
which
helpful, right?
It's funny because I probably should have read that.
It's all right. I had to. They're fine. So this is the tricky part is we learn this information and then it's really hard to empower consumers to do anything about it because there's nothing on a bottle that really guides you unless it is certified. So you can look for an organic certification or a biodynamic certification. So this is an example. I don't know if you can see this little mark here. That's a biodynamic certified wine. However, so many small producers are not going through that process. So it really comes down to finding retailers.
Yeah, because I bet it's really expensive and hard.
It's to go through those processes, yes. And some people will never do it because they think it's marketing. They've always farmed this way, and why pay someone to certify what they're doing, right? So it comes down to developing relationships with restaurants, with retailers, with online sources that you trust that really get it and really care about natural wine and disclose all the information that you're looking for. You can start to kind of notice some producers, some importer names or certain importers who specialize in that. And so you can turn the bottle around. I have a list on my website of importers who specialize. And so if you're in a shop and you can kind of memorize 5 names, you can do it that way. It's really hard. It sucks that consumers have to, enter this so blindly when for every single other ingredient, including personal care products that aren't even as, metabolized as dominantly in your body, that there's nothing to guide you. So find a retailer, find a somm, find a restaurant that specializes in it, and start to learn, start to ask questions. If you're out in wine country, seek out organic producers, and then ask, you know, what else they do. How do they, you know, do they use native yeast? Do they, you know, add any sulfur? How much? You can start to ask questions, but I think consumers, if they can at least find organic, that at least filters out a lot of the shit.
Right.
Biodynamic, if you can find a biodynamic wine, that filters out even more.
So talk to us about the spectrum from $2 chuck to what you're drinking right now, and probably the front porch what we're drinking, but something that's biodynamic or natural.
In terms of, you know, what's in it or what's
know,
not in
like
it?
What's in it? Yeah, what's in it? Like, you know, what, like, you know, is it, you know, added sulfur, or is it, you know, I've heard like $2 chuck, they just take the whole vines off, and, you know, they got everything that comes in from the leaves and the bugs and whatnot. Who knows what's in there?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's
hazel might be in there.
That's the really nasty end of the spectrum. In that, yes, it's completely, you know, machine harvesting. They're taking everything in, they're crushing everything, they're fermenting everything, whatever gets in. And so there are allowances for feces and animal parts and things that get fermented and added to that juice, that then they just dump as much sulfur as they can and all the other additives to make it into something somewhat palatable. So that's the really nasty end of the spectrum, you know, all the way to something that is what I consider natural wine, which is really nothing added, nothing taken away. It's grape juice. It's fermented with the native yeasts that are already on those grapes, and there's nothing added except for perhaps a tiniest bit of sulfur. My threshold, and everyone's got their own, you know, idea. Mine is 50 parts per million, which is really low. So there's a naturally occurring amount of sulfites at about 10 parts per million that is part of the fermentation process, which is why that other really helpful warning on the label says contains sulfites. You don't know if that's the naturally occurring amount, because they are required to put that if it's 10 parts. That is the naturally occurring amount. So you don't know if it's that naturally occurring small level or if it's the maximum 360 parts. And by the way, that's on the honor system. No one's actually testing on the high on the far end. So you don't know actually how much is in it, but you can feel it. If you have a glass of shitty Chardonnay, I bet you can feel that. 2 glasses and you feel horrible the next day, right? Where I think you guys probably
is that what, like, it feels like allergies, right?
Well, yeah.
It's like an antihistamine kind of feeling, right?
It's a highly toxic ingredient that about 10% of the population is somewhat or very allergic to. So if you get that kind of flushed feeling, the stuffy nose when you drink wine, that's probably a reaction to the sulfites. And they kill anything in there, and they sort of freeze it. So it freezes any development, any bacterial development, but it also just mutes it, right? So it's used for many different purposes at many points in the process, but in conventional wine, it's in there in large quantities, and it's measurable. And it is classified at the same level as lead in terms of a probable carcinogen. So would you want to drink anything with lead in it? Probably not. But you're drinking.
And just to make sure our audience is aware.
Huh? I'm sorry.
When you're drinking conventional wine, and we're talking like sort of $2 chuck, if you're buying wine for, you know, very inexpensive, it's going to be very mass produced. Just to make sure we're clear, none of the producers that we have here on the Winedown are in that category. This is your big label wine.
No, so far we've had Noah from Reeve, and we had Megan and Ryan. These are 2 favorite winemakers of Melissa's. So,
yes, absolutely.
We're hitting rock.
And, you know, it also comes down to scale, like you mentioned. You know, the worst offenders are the big conventional producers. I mean, think about how can you possibly buy a bottle of wine for $5 and have it be something of quality, right? But there's also a lot of abuse at the high end in the category of, the trophy wines, the ones that are reliant on the consistency that leads to the scores and the price points and the reviews that drive their business. And so in places like Napa and Rioja and Bordeaux and Burgundy, there are, not all, but there are many, many producers who use a lot of the tricks and tools to ensure that the wine tastes the same vintage after vintage, year after year, and travels around the world. And they know that they're always going to get that Robert Parker score, and the people that with that palate are always going to get the wine that tastes like what they're looking for, right? So with natural and not manipulating, you lose control of the process. You're taking what nature gives you.
That's actually interesting, because I always think of, the conversations that we've had around natural and additives in the wines. I've always thought of it as one of the challenges of, trying to mass produce wine for a lower price point. But I think that's another point, which is trying to recreate wine that tastes a certain way. And I think we're seeing that in kind of like the new wine clubs, where they're producing their own wine to a taste profile that is like, likes a different profile of wine. Maybe they're a new wine drinker and they're trying to make that something that tastes good to them, right?
Right.
And ultimately, like on both ends of the spectrums, it's the manipulation that you like your juice freshly squeezed,
naked, raw.
I like it. All right, so why don't you tell us about one of the challenges you faced as an entrepreneur? And I'll just, I've watched you grow as a CEO and winemaker throughout the last several years since you've started Rock Juice, and it's changed and you've had different challenges along the way. But what would you say is like kind of one of the lessons that you've learned that you feel good that you kind of like made it past that lesson point? Or what's a lesson that you're still learning? You're so stubborn that you won't learn it.
I'm not sure I've learned anything, that's fixed, has room for improvement. But I think, one of the biggest challenges when I started in 2015, there was not really a market for natural wine. There was not a market, and there wasn't as much accessibility even for me as a buyer. This is a new conversation. This is sort of like organic food 10 years ago. It was on the fringe, wasn't, really mainstream. People, I feel like I had to start by evangelizing the concept before I could even really sell the wine, right? Or beyond, the inner circle.
True, like really educating the market.
Yeah. And I feel like we still are to some extent, it still is not, even in San Francisco, the restaurants haven't really embraced it. I feel like I'm still having to do a lot of education, and I haven't done enough because I'm not doing any marketing and, all the things of a small business where you're trying to do too much and really bad at delegating. So I have not learned that lesson. I know you've been preaching to this choir for a while.
Don't worry, delegation is out the window in the world of COVID. But now it's let's just all of us doing whatever we can to stay alive.
Let's give credit where credit is due. You've had a huge influence on the natural wine market and on the demand for this. In both your own business, but also through social media and profiles on Goop. I know. Let's talk about how
I was going to talk about that. Was like,
let's just give some credit here. This is natural wine is becoming a movement, and you're part of why,
right? Somebody's got to lead the movement. And tell us, I would say from an entrepreneurial perspective, we were talking to someone about who is a specialist in influencer marketing. And the thing about that influencer marketing is like, if you can dial in on who your ideal customer is, then there is like the New York Times of that customer, right? So like there's always like one publication that would be your North Star. If I make it there, I can make it anywhere. And I would say for your consumer, Goop would pretty much sum up everything that, and I'm going to say it, yummy mummy culture is. And like, when I heard that from you, that like you were teaching the editorial team at Goop about natural wine, I was like, holy shit, there's her moment. So tell me, how did you get that? How did you get to Goop? How did you get to Goop?
I'm scrappy.
How did you make that happen?
I'm scrappy. I took myself to the Goop.
That's right. That's what we want to hear about it.
I took myself to their in-health conference in LA. I guess that was 3 years ago. Bought the $1,000 ticket. I did get a really cool swag bag out of it though. But I felt like that would be my opportunity to get in front of some editors and say, why are you not talking about wine? You talk about natural and clean in every other aspect. And we know you drink wine because you talk about that too. Like, why are we not talking about this? And they were amazed, had no idea. It was a beautiful start of a relationship. They reached out a few months later, and I've contributed to a couple of things, which led to the big article. So I just put myself in their face and followed up and nurtured the relationships that led to the big bang. So yeah, I mean, and that's, I'm proud of that.
I mean,
I'm proud of that because I spent no money on marketing.
Right?
Take your pause.
Right?
That's not just hustle though, right? You got to show up if you want to do it. If you're sitting, and that's the message to the entrepreneur. If you're sitting at home hoping someone, and I know we're all sitting at home right now. If you're sitting at home and hoping someone's going to see what you're doing as we produce a live TV show, you can't just sit at home. You actually, and even if you did it virtually or else, you've got to be able to find and seek out that audience. You got to hustle. You got to make bets on yourself, like buying the $1,000 ticket and flying down to LA and be prepped and like get in there. And it's your shot. And as Alexander Hamilton says, I'm not going to miss my shot.
I'm not going to miss my shot.
I mean, and then it took, by the way, I think for the audience, I think it's important to say, it took a lot of work after, right? It's not like you just showed up at the event. And I think this is a three-year marketing.
Yeah.
There you go.
3-year process of nurturing.
You worked it.
Contributing and sending wine and going. I fly myself down to their offices once a year and do the big tasting and education. And, I'm keeping that going because I feel like you said, this is my Oprah for my demographic, right? Like, this is key to my market.
Yeah.
Now I need to figure out who's that. Who's that media outlet?
If Gwyneth was Oprah, she'd be saying, you get a rock juice and you get a rock juice and you get a rock juice.
I know. Maybe I need to go after Oprah next, huh? Does she drink wine?
I don't know. Maybe. All right. We got a couple questions from the audience. Do you mind if Ariel suggests going through Gail if you want to hook yourself up with Oprah?
Okay.
Good tip.
Do you have a connection, Ariel?
Let's get you on GMA next. Yeah. Ariel, get working on it. Ariel's my Gelman. Do you remember that reference from Kathy Lee and Regis? I'm like, Gelman! Anyway, all right, we got a couple questions for you, and then I want you to talk about how people can access rock juice and why they should and what's on offer. But before we get there, what about Ariel, God, tough question to begin with, and it's total bullshit, by the way. I'm debunking it already, and then Melissa will do it as well, because we have a lot of friends in California who disagree. What about all the studies that say all California wines have Roundup?
Well, not all, but the problem with California is everything is in close proximity, and there is a runoff. There is a tiny bit. So there have been a few studies that showed organic wine all the way up to really shitty conventional wine, and the measurable levels of Roundup. And they are measurable, even in organic wine, at a low amount, not nearly at the much higher amount. But that is a problem in an area where vineyards are so close to one another, and they share the water, they share the rain, they share the spray from their neighbors. It's a challenge. However, those numbers—
It is a challenge, but don't you think it's fair to say that, like, that's sort of like, and in general, that's a general environmental issue of the world on this great earth thing?
And it's not all California wines. There have been a few studies, and they've tested bigger label wines from areas like Napa where there's density. So, and here's the thing: most natural producers in California aren't buying Napa fruit because they can't afford it. That's legacy fruit. You have to have a hedge fund or, have sold another business to buy that fruit. Everyone that we work with, and most of these small producers, they're buying fruit from Lodi, from Mendocino, all of these places where you don't have the density issue. So it's definitely not all, or their front porch farm where they have no neighbors in sight, right? So it comes down to, you can see when you drive up Highway 29 and how close those vineyards are, clearly that's going to be a problem in an area like Napa. When you get out of those high density areas, not as much.
So, like with all things, you can't make gross generalizations.
Exactly.
And studies that suggest and make large statements tend to create a lot of inflammatory discussions, and actually kind of cloud it's interesting because it clouds the approach that you sort of want to take, which is, it makes wineries that are small producers that are actually producing in a really good, sustainable way get angry because people use statements like, well, all California wines have Roundup, and that's just so awful. And what you're really fighting against is the mass-produced, manipulated wine, really. And I like your term, and I think you and I have different parts of the spectrum here, but like, I like your term of like low intervention, where sometimes you have to intervene, but you're trying to bring out the best quality of the grape rather than manipulate the grape to your desired outcome.
Right. Totally fair.
All right. What regions of the U.S. have embraced natural wines the most in your demographic analysis?
Well, definitely California would be leading, but again, it is generally small producers who don't own vineyards, who are buying fruit, or, small producers. Like Sonoma has a lovely community of low intervention winemakers. There's a good representation in Oregon. That's probably it for the U.S.
But who wants to buy it? What regions want to buy natural wines? Where are you selling the most to?
New York is
Cali?
big. Yeah, East Coast, New York, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Yeah, well, New York has, I think, a much more evolved, even restaurant, natural wine bar scene than we do. So I think New York is probably the biggest U.S. market, but then there's pockets like Austin and Colorado. I've got clients in every state. I mean, I think for a service like mine, where they can't find it in their local, cities, is where, I'm doing really well because I can send it to them. But it's growing. It's growing. The younger generation, the millennials who grew up with funkier flavor profiles and blue cheese and kombucha, they're more open to it. This is not, these are not your daddy's Cabernets, right? This is a different style, and it takes some.
My daddy drank Le Pied d'Or, the wine that's always good to pour.
I don't even know that one.
I've never even heard of that. Is that a Canadian thing?
It totally is. He also, when it was fancy, like a special weekend, it would be called Mouton Cadet.
Oh,
it's a French wine.
You would just
Cadet.
give
and
it
so
a different...
literally, I was like, so are we having some sheep cadet today? Because Mouton in French is sheep cadet. I'm pretty sure it was I'm 100% sure it was natural, Melissa.
Probably.
I mean,
not.
I know it didn't score a 95. I could tell you that. So I'm saying he was the original natty wine drinker.
$5. Yeah.
I
No,
don't know
most of the
the
natural.
cost thing. I mean, I think it was more of an early 80s thing. There wasn't a lot of access and not a lot of knowledge. There wasn't a lot of knowledge, at least not in my world. I mean, as you guys know, Chris and I shared similar upbringings, him growing up in Africa and me growing up in suburban Toronto. So, you know, a lot of culture. So let's dig in on rock juice. How do people get access to rock? I need me some rock juice, and I actually just placed
yours
an
is
order.
coming Friday. Yep.
I know.
So
I can't wait.
we are all online. So the core business and where I started was the subscription service. So people get 6 or 12 bottles every other month. Used to be monthly. Now it's every other month. And then we have an online shop that is always open. We provide full transparency and information about the wine, who made it, what's it all about, what's in it, how much sulfur is added, all of the details. And I don't know if we have a little note section of this. I can put a discount code in for anyone listening who wants to check it out.
What? That's amazing. And by the way, we do. So we produce this show, and then we will publish it on our YouTube Launchpad TV. And Alec is learning all about natural wine, so we can write a blog post and showcase any links that you have. So we'll be highlighting that, and a discount code would be fantastic. In fact, we could probably send it out with our Ross.io newsletter next week.
We sure could.
Right?
Sweet.
Sure can.
Sweet. Yes. And we can ship.
You deliver to all our states. I know, because I've had you shipped to us.
Yes, all but 7 states that are super tricky. So if you're in Utah, sorry. But we even ship to Hawaii. I have a client who is in Hawaii and gets her box and pays $170 for shipping. Most people don't have to pay that much. Hawaii's tough. But yeah, we can get you wine wherever you are.
I mean, I'm not really excited to get on a plane right now, but if you needed me to drop a delivery, really do at the beach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Too, for sure.
So, rock juice. How did you come up with the name? Is a question from the audience.
Oh, I was in Chablis when I was pregnant with Xander. So, gosh, 9.5 years ago. And the vignerons called their wine rock juice because we were in the vineyards and literal white chalky rocks is the topsoil. And it always stuck with me. It sounded, it defines my palate. I love wine that comes from rocky, volcanic, minerally soils. It translates into the wine. You sort of taste that in so many of the wines that I love. So I struggled with finding a name. I, tried to come up with names that sort of described the service, and they all seemed so wonky. And then that just hit me, rock juice, and that was it. Because people sort of have to trust my palate because I'm choosing wines for them for the most part, right? So if they want the buttery Chardonnays and the, slutty cabs, they're not going to find it here. If they want the lean, low alcohol, mineral driven wines, that's what we specialize in. So, yeah.
I mean, if they want a slutty pet nat, they could get that from you.
Oh, totally. I mean, pet nat.
Just not a slutty cab.
Exactly.
Amazing. All right. Well, we are coming up on time. Let's do a wrap up here. Melissa, can you share with us how to get access to rock juice and what you recommend, and just give our audience a little plug on what you got going on?
Sure. It's rockjuiceinc.com. We're going to put that in the show notes. I would recommend, if you're new to natural wine, starting with a 6-bottle mix and letting me choose. There's an intake form. You get to tell me about your preferences, the type of wine you typically like to drink. There's even an open section where you can put notes in, and people write essays about what they like, what they don't like, what they don't want. But that helps me learn about your palate. And then we curate from the unique mix that we buy each month. We curate specifically to your palate. So if you're new, give me some information about what you want to drink, and let us choose for you. And then we like feedback. We like it when people send us pictures and say, I love this one and I didn't, because then it gets even more finely tuned for the next time.
Awesome. Okay, I got one last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's my Band-Aid question. So I was with Sebastian. This was like when Harper was still able to sleep in the Docketot. So, you know, you go to a dinner party and then she'd sleep. We had dinner with him and we were talking about natural wine, and we were drinking some of his wines and some friends of his. And he said, there's a thing and it tastes like a Band-Aid. And that's when you know that there's a flaw in the wine. What I would say is that has been one of the most interesting things that I've heard, because sometimes there is a flaw in a wine and you will definitely identify that and say it. And sometimes it's a little bit more of the natty style that's coming through. How can you tell the difference?
Well, so there's a difference between funk and off. Okay. So some people like what you're referring to, the Band-Aid phenomenon, is something called Brett, which is short for Brettanomyces, which is a type of bacteria that gets in the wine. So some people might call that a flaw. Other people really like that. And it creates this sort of barnyard Band-Aid-y. You find it a lot in certain regions. But, you know, sometimes it's a person's cup of tea. A flaw.
Is it your cup of tea?
Not really. So I don't buy those wines. I don't really like wines that have any of these off flavors. So another one would be mouse. Some people don't mind it. Mouse is something, maybe that might be an industry term. It kind of tastes like cornflakes in the wine. Have you ever had a wine that kind of has this cornflakey taste?
Yeah.
That is mouse. I really dislike that. So I don't buy any wines that taste like that. Now, something that is truly off or flawed would be like cork taint. So if you've never had cork taint, it tastes like wet cardboard. You can smell it. You don't want to drink that. That's bad. That's gross. Send it back. If you get that in a restaurant, send it back. So yeah, I guess it's your tolerance for, you know, these kind of wilder aspects of natural wine. When you're not controlling it with any manipulation, sometimes these things happen like Brett or mouse. Careful, clean winemakers usually can work around those things. And, you know, again, it comes down to trusting the palate of who you're buying from or asking for recommendations from. I don't like those things. I don't buy wines that have that knowingly. Now, some wines with no added sulfur by day 2 or 3 will start to develop that mouse quality. You just drink it the first day. I mean, how hard is that? You can drink more natural wine without feeling it the next day. I think you guys would attest to that, right?
Oh,
it's less.
We're going to have you back on.
Process. Huh?
No hangovers.
Well, you know,
right?
It's not a magic bullet. You still have to moderate and drink water, but you can drink more and fill it less. That is
fair enough.
Tested over.
I've drank more with you and felt it less as well. Can you give us your guilty pleasure pairing of wine and food?
Oh, guilty pleasure.
Or your favorite pairing? Just your treat.
My treat.
I'll give you this. Megan's was onion dip, and you would never serve this. Onion dip, potato chips, and champagne.
Oh, I can see that. Yeah. So my guilty pleasure wine would probably be like a really delicious chillable red, something gamay like. I would probably just drink the whole bottle without anything, and that would be my guiltiest pleasure. I feel like it's
this
super
is why Melissa is thinner than I am. Melissa's there. I'm just drinking the wine, and I'm like, but I need to la 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 la.
Well, speaking of that, let's have
whatever delicious meal Melissa's made for me.
Oh,
All right.
can't wait to make you a beautiful meal soon. Please, let's end this.
We can't wait to see you either. This is great to see you online. Great to see you. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank
It's
you
so
for
fun.
sharing your story with our community
Love
about
it.
your perseverance and how you can't just get on Goop by asking Goop to get on Goop.
Or hiring a
And I
PR
think if I were
person.
Alec, I'd be writing about that in my blog post.
Oh, super fun. Thank you guys. Love you.
Love you.
Look
All
for
right.
your
We'll
wine
see you
on
soon, Melissa.
Friday. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.